our program, which all of you, of course, want to hear, because it's kind of interesting. You kind of forget about Geuda Springs. Did I get the pronunciation right this time? It's Geuda instead of Geuda Springs, right? Anyway, we kind of forget about it over there because there's not a whole lot there. But wow, did it have a colorful history. And Gary Learned is going to share that with us. So.
Thank you.
Is that turned on?
Yeah, I did get it on this time. I hope it records well. Yeah, in case you can't hear this or go blind or asleep during the presentation, it'll be on YouTube later. Yeah, Geuda Springs. I'm going to qualify myself a little here. I wouldn't say I'm an expert on Geuda Springs, but I did live there once. It just so happens, however, that I was about 3 or 4 years old at the time. I did grow up just outside Geuda on what we call the Spence Place, about 5 miles southwest of town. But we did pass through Geuda on our way to the Spence Place, and we lived there in 1947 and 48, part of both years. So, Geuda Springs, what was the heyday? What was it like? And some opinion maybe on why it is no longer a heyday at Geuda Springs. Because it certainly had some fits and starts. Some obstacles got thrown in the way of that beautiful resort, we'll put it that way. And I see a lot of faces this evening that I know live in Geuda and have lived there most of their lives. So if you hear me say something that's just not true, shoot your hand up and we'll discuss it. Having said that, I've got to say that most of what I'm going to say tonight has either been already written down by somebody else, particularly Margaret Russell Stallard. I'm sure many of you are familiar with that book. And if you're not, Diane Kelly will be glad to sell you a copy. I think you still have some, do you not?
We do.
Over at the Geuda Museum. It's an interesting book. Got a lot of history in there. A lot of family history in there. Not just Geuda Springs itself, but the families that lived in and around there. The book also has, in my opinion, a few mistakes in it. And I might point those out as we go along. Nothing big, but sometimes it's just obvious and it jumps out at you. So we'll cover the springs tonight. By that I mean the springs themselves, the 7 mineral springs. Owners and developers, in fact, will be kind of the theme. I struggled a little with how to put this together, and I finally decided to do it on a more or less timeline basis, following the owners and developers that had their fingers in those springs a lot over the years. We'll talk a little bit about the railroads. They became a factor, the lake and the dam, and towards the end we'll talk a little about a couple of restoration attempts that were made. Seemed like someone was always trying to rejuvenate the springs and or the lake or the resort as a whole. So prior to the 1860s, the only people that knew about the springs were obviously the Native Americans. It was a place where many tribes would gather for the healing properties of the waters. And in fact, in their minds, it was probably a sacred ground. It was also neutral. If there were otherwise warring tribes that came across each other at that point, at the springs, everything, excuse me, all fights were off. We just discussed a little a minute ago about the pronunciation, and I've heard several different pronunciations of Geuda. One of my favorites is Judy. I don't know where that comes from, or Judah, or Geuda, or you name it. But it derives from a Tonkin Indian word, Geuda, and that was healing in Tonkin. Geuda ne was healing water. So that's how we ended up with Geuda Springs. Buffalo hunters were probably the first guys to come across this, and at least they are the first ones that reported having visited there in 1867. The springs that they found were in an area no more than 25 feet in diameter, 7 separate springs with 7 different tastes. And when these 7 waters were tested chemically, the laboratory said, yes, they are in fact different sources because the chemical makeup is different in each one of them. Some of them, I think, were a little less than tasty. In fact, some newspaper accounts, the reporter just flat says, some of that stuff tastes pretty ugly. Some of them, I think, were much more palatable than others. In fact, I believe the ones that were bottled came out of what was at the time called Springs number 1 and number 2, as near as I can tell. But there were 7 of them that had 7 different tastes and 7 different chemical makeups, literally next to each other. An interesting makeup of earth and water, to say the least. There was also a saltwater spring that was pretty much like pure salt, and that spring was used by the early white men that were there. Several of them became involved over the years in evaporating that water to make salt and selling it as a manufacturing concern. One of the problems being, though, that to make money on salt, you had to ship it in quantities, and when they were trying to do this, there were no railroads. Those came later, so the salt business came and went multiple times. This is 1881, I think, map of Geuda Springs and Salt City, and we'll stop and talk about Salt City a minute. Salt City was there first as a city. It was platted first. Houses were planted there first. Then later, when the springs became profitable, so to speak, there were a lot of houses built downtown near the springs. The red arrow is pointing at the location of the springs themselves. By the time this map was drawn, they had already been improved somewhat. In fact, probably at this time already had a house built over them, or at least some sort of shelter. This is simply another old map. I think this one's 1882, showing that at First Street and Spring Avenue, just an underhand easy pitch across the Cali County line, or inside Cali County, is where those springs were located. You also notice on this old map, Salt Creek is not dammed up at this point, and there are salt springs on the North Shore marked out there, as well as a salt soda iron sulfur spring. I bet that tasted good. I had some near personal experience with those springs along Salt Creek. My older brother Bob, and for those of you who knew him, he's alive and well in Texas these days. He's 90 years old. He waded that creek when he was a youngster, I think, seining fish bait. And he said that you would springs as you walked along the creek, you could feel the springs in the form of cooler water coming out from some of the banks. Wrong direction. This is a current modern satellite view of Geuda, and the red arrow and dot show you where those springs were located. Very overgrown now. Correct me if I'm wrong, someone from Geuda, but I don't think you can even see them from the street anymore, can you? I mean,
Just a foundation.
just the cement foundation.
Stones
Okay, so ownership. The first guy to buy the 160 acres that included those springs was a guy by the name of W.J. Walpole. And he was in fact, I guess you would call that a homestead situation, because he was granted that 160 acre quarter section by the United States of America in July of 1872. Of course, that's only 5 years after the first white man had visited the springs. From 1872 to 1878, the quarter section changed hands, and therefore the springs belonged to Loomis, Grable, and David Bright. Eventually, in that period, somewhere along the line, apparently David Bright buys out the other two guys, because there's records in 1878 of him selling to W.P. Hackney and Wade McDonald for $290 the quarter section and the springs and everything that went with them. They, McDonald and Wade, or Hackney, were the first to actually make improvements to the spring area. I think they kind of tamped down the ground a little bit and maybe put up a fence. We'll see some pictures here later of some of the early improvements that were made in an effort to market the spring, so to speak. Then in 1879, just a year later, Hackney and McDonald sell to Clinton R. Mitchell for $4,000. Things are going up. And some of these are facts, I'm sure. Some of these facts may be wrong, but I find it interesting that, because if I remember correctly, this all happened the same day. Mitchell buys the quarter section for $4,000 and turns around and sells to A.A. Newman of Newman Dry Goods fame an undivided half of that quarter section for $3,000. That math doesn't work, but that's what was reported in the Ark City Traveler in pretty plain English. In any case, Mitchell and Newman set about making more improvements, including a bathhouse, and I believe they were the ones that actually poured the first concrete around the springs to keep them from silting in, hopefully. Like I say, we'll look at a picture here in a minute. More hanky-panky, 2 years later, Newman sells his $3,000 half back to Mitchell for $10,000. And by the way, we aren't even halfway there yet. Wait till we get to Mr. Tuttle. So during the period of 81 to 1901, Mitchell is the sole owner, and he sees a need, rightfully so, that we need stuff in Cali County, but the springs are in Cali County, but at this point, nothing had been developed that wasn't in Sumner. That was in Sumner County, was the only houses and businesses. So he platted the East Geuda Springs edition so that he could attract businesses, and attract he did. It built up fairly quickly. And there were a lot of new businesses opened up in that period. Of course, we're talking 20 years here. But, for instance, the Gilbert Hotel, which would become the Loomis, a bank was opened, a print shop, restaurant, just a lot of new businesses right next to the springs. Lake Juanita. At some point, someone dammed up Salt Creek with what I assume was an earthen dam to make a lake for recreation purposes. We'll be looking at that early lake, or have we already? Hold on a minute here. No, we haven't. There was an early version of Lake Juanita that was not much of a lake. It got bigger as the years went on, and it washed out over several times over the years. In fact, you'll see that just 9 years after they built it or rebuilt it in 99, it washes out again. There was an interesting period in 1893 that the women in the town, led more or less by Mrs. Buckwalter, and I should talk about the Buckwalters a little. Mr. and Mrs. Buckwalter operated more or less, well, for a while they sold bottled water out of the springs, carried it all over the countryside, but eventually they ended up running the hotel and bathhouse. That they were there long enough that it kind of became known as the Buckwalter Hotel, but it was never officially named that I know of. I think it was officially the Geuda Hotel and Bathhouse. In any case, they were very well known in town. If I remember right, Mrs. Buckwalter birthed the first child in Geuda Springs. She had been there almost from the beginning, she and her husband. Anyway, things kind of got out of hand downtown, so Mrs. Buckwalter and some of her lady friends took over the mayorship and town council in 1893. I had a little trouble understanding how long that lasted, but according to write-ups in the paper, or the papers, they cleaned the town up in more ways than one. In 1899, after owning it for 18 years, Mitchell sold the lake, the springs, and that quarter section to a Mr. Taylor. I'm not sure where Taylor was from, but he had it for a couple of years. Well, I just breezed past several slides. We'll look at some pictures here that were taken. Most of these were taken during the period that we just discussed, 1881 or so to about 1900. This is the first bathhouse that was built next to the springs. That was built, if I'm not mistaken, by Mr. Newman and Mr. Mitchell. There would later be multiple bathhouses, but and much bigger, but this was the first of them. And here we see what appears to be the first actual improvements to the springs. The springs being to your left behind that fence-like structure, running into each of the 7 springs appear to be running into these little troughs down here. The springs themselves were back here. Here is what would become the Hotel Loomis, but I believe this picture was taken early enough that it was at that time it was called the Hotel Gilbert. A lot of postcards produced back in the 1890s and early 1900s with Geuda Springs businesses on them. Some of them I think have inaccurate labeling, but so be it. There is the Loomis. This is 1902. So this is after Mr. Tuttle came on the scene. Quite the structure. That's 3-story brick, by the way. Here, during this period, is the first railroad depot in town. Some of you are old enough, like me, to actually remember that structure when it was McDaniel Grain. I hauled a lot of wheat into that building, hoping it wouldn't fall on me. Had a drive-on lift that picked the front wheels of the pickup or the truck up, and they didn't start well when you went back down. The carburetors would typically be flooded. But I'm jumping ahead 100 years here. Anyway, this was the originally the Frisco Depot. Eventually, it becomes at Topeka and Santa Fe in the early 1900s. There'll be another railroad show up in Geuda, but that's on down the line a ways yet.
What is that vehicle in the corner there?
This would probably be what we call a hack. It's a horse-drawn taxi that would take everybody downtown. Because we're talking, what, 3/4 of a mile maybe? Somebody walked that? So yeah, I'm sure there were for hire taxis for quite a while. Here's some advertisements, and I'm going to read to you from one of these about what these waters can cure. We'll leave out some of the stuff there at the top. Diabetes, sciatica, catarrh, diseases of the skin, liver, and kidneys, erysipelas, dyspepsia, and our best known remedy to tone up the digestive organs. We'll leave that where it's at. They had first-class bathhouses, and they were better than any Turkish bath. But I love the guarantee. To prove what they meant, if you didn't get cured, you didn't owe them anything, including board or your room. So you could go to Geuda, drink the water, lay in the mud, whatever they told you to do, and not pay a cent if your rheumatism wasn't cured. Never mind female weakness. Here we have that hotel that everybody wants to call the Buckwalter, and mainly because the Buckwalters ran it and the adjoining bathhouse for like 2 decades. Beautiful structure. I believe I read in one, it might have been Margaret's book, that was literally torn down in the 30s. It did not burn, unlike a lot of buildings in Geuda Springs. Here are the springs after we've gone in and really fixed them up. So what we have here are the 7 springs. We'll use this example. That's the spring. There's an earthen, ceramic, I assume, pot that is piped into the ground. The water comes up, and there's a pitcher spout there that pours into this trough that goes into that catch point. So I assume this was done to keep people out of the springs, but allow them to gather water down here from whichever spring they decided they needed. And incidentally, I don't have it listed here on any of the slides, but there were specific things that you did from each specific spring as far as cures were concerned. Spring number 1 was good for rheumatism. Spring number 3 was good for whatever. Now, some of it obviously worked because people came back and people were in fact cured. But later on, well, we'll talk about what happened later on. So, Mr. O. Taylor had the springs till 1901, and the next guy on the scene is James L. Tuttle. Tuttle lived in Wichita. I'm not sure whether he was simply an entrepreneur. I don't think he was a lawyer, but in any case, he must have had some money. He owned a lot of land in Oklahoma, and he bought, here we go again, now we're back down to $700. And that's one of those facts I want to maybe dispute a little. I just can't believe that actually happened. That may have been a part of what he bought. I don't think it was the springs, the hotels, the bathhouses and all that. I just can't believe he got it for that money. But James was a wheeler dealer, so I may be totally wrong. So he starts making improvements, and some serious ones, because he's determined that is a gold mine in the making, that being the springs and the associated accoutrements, including the lake and hotels. I believe this included, by the time he buys it, the springs, 80 or 160 adjacent. I think it had been split into 280s. Another 100 or so acres that included the lake, and 2 hotels, a bathhouse, a bottling plant. It was quite a it was Geuda Springs minus most of the residents. It's that simple. It was the whole thing. So one of the improvements they did was they actually built a concrete dam for the lake. We'll see a photo of that in a minute or two. So that like tripled the size of the lake, if not more. Unfortunately, between 06 and 08, there were a lot of fires, but the big one was in 1908. 9 buildings were wiped out right downtown in one fire. And it would have been more, but they tore one building down to save the building adjacent. So it stems from the fact that having been incorporated since 1883, I believe, and it's now 1908, there's no fire department. None. Zero. Not a hose, not a wagon, not a horse. So they rang up Ark City, and Ark City jumped in a car with some fire extinguishers and headed for Geuda Springs, and according to the paper, made it out there in record time of 25 minutes. But and I think one of the people in that car with the fire extinguishers was in fact the chief, and he got there and said, "Are you kidding? We aren't putting this out." Just to top it off, you know, everybody had buckets, and they aren't that far from the lake. Unfortunately, the lake had been drained. There's no water. So, ironic, ain't it? Geuda Springs, no water to put out a fire. I don't know what their city system, water system was at that time, if anything, but obviously it must not have been much. Okay, and we'll see. So I think I've got one or two photos of the fire area. Also, while Mr. Tuttle owns this, the Midland Valley, which, a little background, the Midland Valley started in 1903 or so, I think, in, not Little Rock, Fort Smith, Arkansas. Built a railroad through Tulsa, Muskogee, Scheidler, cross country, and it ends up at Silverdale, at which point they hook up with the Missouri Pacific tracks from Silverdale into Ark City. So they had Ark City to Fort Smith service. In 1910, they announced they would extend that service from Ark City to Wichita. And that wasn't all they did, but we'll get into that in a minute. So here's some pictures from this era. We're talking right after the turn of the century. This is a place called the Lakeview Hotel. Don't have a clue where it was located. One account says it was on the north shore of the lake, but I personally have trouble buying that. There would have been, in my opinion, no reason to put one over there yet. But in any case, it was called the Lakeview. So says the postcard notation right there. At one point, Geuda has 5 hotels. The Lakeview, the Central, Buckwalter, the Loomis, and one that I have never found the name of. But there were supposed to be 5 hotels at one point. Most of them, I think, were 100 or so beds, but not all of them. Obviously, the Lakeview was not that big. But there were a lot of rooming houses in addition to the hotels. Here's the spring house that Mr. Tuttle, I think Mr. Tuttle built. It's certainly his name up here on the board. If you can't make it out, but it says Geuda Mineral Water Company, James Tuttle, sole owner. Apparently he wanted everybody to know that that was his and his mom. Here's another, yeah, you can actually read the sign here.
Ice cream sign.
Yeah, he also had an ice cream store. Gosh, I forgot that. And I assume it must have been in his spring house somewhere. Okay, here we are constructing in 1905 that concrete dam for Lake Juanita on Salt Creek. And you can see the Buckwalter in the background over there on the right. So the dam and lake were not that far from downtown, a block or so at most. That dam, I did not put it in here because I took a picture of it. What remains a couple of years ago during the fall when you could actually see it from the bridge east of it, but it's a lousy shot. But there are remains out there on Salt Creek of that dam. And here's another shot of it. I'm not sure this is the exact same dam they were building in 1905. It's not shaped the same, so this may be an earlier attempt. I don't know why they had trouble. The earthen dams, I understand. If it rained a lot, they just washed out. But apparently, well, we know the one that they built last in '05 washed out. Like I say, the remains are still out there. And it just pushed the middle of it away. Now we're looking from the dam into town. And you can see the Buckwalter in the background and the boathouse. Should mention that when Lake Juanita was at its best, by that I mean 30 to 50 acres, depending on whose newspaper you read. They had boats for rent, everything from canoes to a motor launch. I think even a sailboat or two. So it was there was a pretty good business going on down there. And guess who owned it? Mr. Tuttle. Here's that shot, and I know there's a better copy of this somewhere out there on the internet, but this is the best I could do for the moment. That building, I believe, and you folks from Geuda that actually know, and correct me if I'm wrong, but the building in the background that did not burn, is my understanding that was the post office. And between the post office and the building that actually caught on fire, which was Mr. Roebuck's general store, his store was the second door this side of the post office. Between the two was a barber shop. And when the townspeople discovered that they were a little behind the curve on trying to put this fire out, the wind was out of the south, and by the way, you're looking to the south, if I'm not mistaken. The wind was out of the south, but they were afraid that the post office would catch on fire from Mr. Roebuck's general store just half a door north, so to speak. So they literally tore the barber shop down to keep it from spreading south. I'm sure the barber was happy about that. But what ended up happening here is that post office is at the north or the south end of a block. It looks to me like this is probably the north end of the block. The curve appears to be turning west. This is north and south. It took out all the buildings in that block, jumped the street, and took out a hotel, the Central Hotel, across the street north before they put it out. And probably it would have gone further, but there was a few empty lots north of that hotel, so that's where the fire burned itself out. In any case, that's quite a setback because it was about a third of the downtown business area. Didn't help. Okay, let's get back to the Midland Valley Railroad. They came through town in 1910. They said we're gonna extend the rails from Ark City to Wichita, and we're gonna go through Geuda, Oxford, Belle Plaine. And that they did. But the same investors that had financed that extension of the Midland Valley decided, let's buy Geuda Springs. And Mr. Tuttle was more than happy to sell it to them for $100,000. This was a $50,000 upfront deal, with the rest being in the form of a mortgage. They planned a huge expansion of the entire complex, including housing that I'll show you in a minute. The only other thing that was holding things back at this point, I just had to mention this. I believe it was a doctor who was part of the health department in Wichita discovered that some of the bottled water that was being sold in Wichita had organic material in it that would make you sick, or at least that was his opinion. So of the 5 companies that were delivering bottled water to Wichita, 3 of them were banned. And oh, by the way, one of them was Geuda Springs Bottling Company, run by Mr. Tuttle. I don't know how it happened, when it happened. All I know is that the ban was lifted. They must have come and inspected the springs and decided, must have been a bad sample, who knows. But in any case, they continued to sell water. And you'll see what I call Tuttle 2.0. You'll see that he was selling to Wichita and other places later. Okay, here's the plan. This is the original pamphlet that they circulated. That group of investors that had financed the Midland Valley Railroad. This was their plan for Geuda Springs. They had purchased, in addition to all this stuff downtown, the quarter section adjacent north of the lake. And here's your first look at Lake Juanita in its later form. And that's an eye chart. Don't worry about it. I'm going to show it to you in better relief here in a second. But this was the Midland Valley investors' plan for Geuda Springs in 1912. And here I've enhanced this a little. The red is the railroad right-of-way. The lake is in blue here, the dam being right here. And like I said, it's not far from downtown because here's downtown. Make note of this housing development that's going to happen here. There are literally, I didn't count them, okay, but I'm pretty good at estimating things. There has to be 300 or 400 or 500 lots platted in this plan, and apparently that was their goal, was to fill that with houses.
So is this all in the Cali County side of the line? Where's
No,
for reference?
no, I should point out that it's on both sides. The Cali County line, I gotta get out here where I can see this. The Cali County line is that blue line right there that runs down to here. Right here are the springs.
I have a question too.
Go.
You mentioned one of the hotels, you didn't know the name. Have you heard of the Mockingbird Lodge?
Yes, but that was not,
That was smaller.
right. And I apologize, I should have put a picture of the Mockingbird.
I found a picture on eBay.
Huh?
I found a picture on eBay.
Oh yeah, there's always pictures on eBay, yes.
My great-grandmother worked there when she was younger.
Cool. Yeah, the Mockingbird Lodge was kind of famous. But in any case, that was their plan. How much of this got done was very little. However, let's take a look at a satellite photo today. Guess what's out there?
Wow.
This is 110, 15 years later. They obviously did dirt work. They may not planted any houses, but they did lay it out and move some dirt around. I believe, and again, if anybody knows better, shoot your hand up, but I believe that was pasture and has been pasture ever since. Where it didn't get turned over with a plow, and it's still, that's just amazing to me.
Yes. Yeah, that's what
I've been told that of course this Now, I will admit, I enhanced this a little, but damn little. All I did was enhance the contrast on it a little. If you do the raw picture that Google Earth shows you, it's there, no question. And I've been told that you can see it from the air if you're up a few thousand feet. And certain times of the year, it will probably be more visible than others, depending on how green the grass is. And this was probably ideal timing in that respect. There's Tuttle's house, and I'm gonna talk about a story. The story is that at some point Tuttle got mad at the city council because they wouldn't let him build a house on a certain location. They were gonna have to close the street if he built his house where he wanted to build it. So he said, well, fine, I'll go build it somewhere else. And he did, on the hill east of town. And the story is that he also told them, I will build a house on top of that hill out there and watch the pigs take over Geuda Springs. Now, it's a good story, and it may even be true, I don't know. I'm of the opinion it might have happened later, and we'll get into that here in a little bit. But this was literally, is literally a mansion. What's the lady's name that lives there? Or
Linda.
who does live there now?
Banks.
Linda.
Yes, Linda. And if I'm not mistaken, she was a hatter. I remember that place being, this unfortunately was taken probably, I'm guessing, in the 60s when there was no one living there, 50s maybe. That place sat empty for a long, long time. When I was this big in Geuda Springs, my mom took me out there. We didn't tour the house, but we did walk up on the front porch. And it had been empty for a long time then, and that was in 47. But the Houck family, if I'm not mistaken, are the ones that refurbished it and made it a beautiful house.
In about 73 or something.
Right.
Probably.
Right. I wish we had a better picture of it, because it's a beautiful place. But apparently there weren't a whole lot of pictures taken of it, and there may have been a reason for that. This is simply a little advertisement that was run in the Ark City Traveler in 1913. This had been while the Midland Valley investors had control. They they put a motor car service in that ran from Ark City to Wichita, up and back every day. And for those of you not as nerdly about railroads as I am, motor car was this one was probably a gasoline electric. By that I mean there was a gasoline motor that drove a generator that ran electric motors to power the car. And it was simply a huge passenger car that was self-powered with a headlamp and a baggage compartment in the back. Typically they held 80 to 90, maybe 100 people. But anyway, they put it on service every day, and you know, no smoke, no dust, no cinders. They're talking about steam engines because there were no diesel electrics at that time. We're talking 1913 here. What they didn't say here is that there was absolutely no danger of having your breath taken away. You'll notice it takes 25 minutes to get from Ark City to Geuda Springs. It's 7 miles. That's 19 miles an hour. So it wasn't all that speedy. But like I say, no smoke, no dust, no cinders.
Okay,
Yes.
did they call that also the interurban?
No.
Was the
Good.
interurban?
I'm glad you brought that up.
Was Ark City?
This was the Midland Valley Railroad running on Midland Valley tracks. And Midland Valley owned the motor car. The only interurban that ever operated in Cali or Sumner counties was only from Ark City to Winfield and back. And it was on its own right-of-way with their own electric streetcars.
Wow.
Now, but I'm glad you brought that up because I don't have it in my notes or anything here. If there were one, there were 10 different plans to furnish electric interurban service to Geuda Springs. Every time you turned around, there was a newspaper article saying, we're gonna have an electric. Well, it never happened. It just never even got, this would, the motor car would be as close as they got to something that you would call an interurban. And again, like I say, it was gas electric, it was self-contained, no overhead trolley wires. Here's just simply another downtown shot. I'm guessing this is 1910-ish, just based on that automobile. It's brass era, as we call it, so late aughts to early teens, probably. I don't know which building this is. Originally, I think the first copy I ever saw of this had some handwriting up here, and it was like a barber shop and a grocery store and a hardware store or something in that photo.
This is a silly question, but are there handrails going up the side of the building?
Yes, yes. I would bet that's all rooming houses, or rooms.
Yeah, but I couldn't see him.
Yeah, there's handrails. Yeah. Surprisingly. Here we go. There's another shot of Lake Juanita. Like I said, sometimes you find mistakes. Anybody notice they left the U out?
Yeah.
Anybody notice this says Missouri Pacific Railroad? No. It was Midland Valley. Missouri Pacific never went to Geuda Springs on anybody's rails. I don't know. Here's your springs and bathhouse probably. I believe this is 1918. Well, Gary, you've missed one. There we go. All right. Tuttle sells it to the Midland Valley investors. Guess what? They couldn't come up with the other 50 grand. Tuttle gets it back. Now, the exact figures are very confusing. I've never been able to determine reading newspaper articles whether he got that back free and clear or whether he had to buy the mortgage back, but at worst case, he got it back along with the improvements that they had made. And they had made some improvements downtown as well as went out there on the hill and dug up all that dirt. But obviously he decided that, or must have decided that housing development was a no-go. He never went any further with it. But in any case, he foreclosed on the mortgage and is again in the Geuda Springs business. There was an interesting article or 2 or 6 in 1916, and here's where we're going to tie back to, I'm going to watch the pigs take over Geuda Springs. In 1916, for whatever reason, but mostly because he wasn't being paid for the water, he made an announcement, not only in the Ark City Traveler and the Geuda Springs Herald, but also in Wichita papers and Oklahoma City papers and wherever else he could write to. I'm closing the springs, I'm closing the hotels, I'm closing the bathhouses. They're done until you guys meet my demands. The demand was, and apparently this all took place in a week or less. It's kind of fuzzy because some papers got the story sooner than others. But he opened them back up, and the announcement in the paper was the springs, the bathhouses, the hotels are open again, and people can get water again so long as they have a permit. Now, it doesn't say what that permit cost him, but I'm sure it was more than $1 or $2 to be able, he was upset that the competing hotels were getting water from those springs for free. And I guess rightfully so. But in my opinion, here's some more opinion, I think the guy was a little up to here with Geuda Springs. He had already sold it once and had to buy it back in a form. So I think he was just tired of dealing with Geuda Springs. He says, I'm gonna make money or I'm not gonna be here. So in 1920, he does sell it after a fashion. This is the most convoluted deal you've ever heard of. Tuttle trades Geuda Springs, the whole 9 yards, for 3,200 acres of land in Texas. The owner of the 3,200 acres, now the owner of Geuda Springs, the same day sold it to 3 other businessmen. No money numbers were published in the papers. We don't know what this amounted to, who compensated whom, if at all. But in any case, it was all put together by a guy by the name of Wilson that lived in Geuda Springs. And this guy was a wheeler dealer, probably the realtor from hell. He made deals in Missouri, Texas, you name it, from Geuda Springs. And he put this all together, and it all happened in one day. Here's the newspaper notices about the Geuda Hotel, Loomis Hotel, Bathhouse, and Springs will be closed this season. Water will be shipped from the mineral springs as usual in 5-gallon glass containers and 5 and 10-gallon paraffin-lined kegs for 10 cents a gallon. FOB Geuda Springs. J.L. Tuttle, owner. So he was still selling water, but you couldn't grab it and use it in Geuda. And just to make sure that it stuck, he closed his own hotels as part of the deal, or at least that was the threat. And a couple other articles on that subject, but he did eventually open the springs back up. Okay. Mr. Tuttle died 6 years later in a tornado in Oklahoma. No, in Texas. Apparently he was visiting or helping, I think one article said they were harvesting wheat. Probably on that 3,200 acres that he bought or traded for. And he was sleeping in a kind of a little cabin that he built in this little town in Texas near his farmland, ranch, whatever you want to call it, and was sleeping, and a tornado came through that night. The nearest hospital, the nearest hospital was 85 miles away, and they loaded him in a car and took him to Shattuck, Oklahoma, to a hospital, but he died that next evening. His wife lived there in the mansion for another few years, I think, but by 1930 or 32, it's being converted to a sanitarium. A lot of stories out there. It was built as a hospital and Tuttle was a doctor. No, he wasn't a doctor. He was a businessman, and it was never a hospital. After he sold it, they converted the home to a sanitarium, and a Dr. Richter ran it, who was famous for colonics.
House is a big house that was up on the hill.
Straight east of Geuda. about a half a mile. You can't miss it.
Yeah, we went through there as teenagers.
Oh, did you?
Down into the basement.
Oh, yeah, you know, I
A lot
never,
of showers. There was a lot of
Yes,
showers
yes.
down in the basement.
that was all done by Dr. Richter.
That'd have been about 60.
Right, while it was boarded up.
Down there.
You know, you were trespassing.
Yes, we were. It was about 4 of us. We didn't do
I've
no
heard
vandalism.
I've heard 100 stories like
No,
that.
we did no vandalism. We just looked around.
Okay, let's see here, where were we? So Lewis Foster, who was one of the 3 gentlemen that bought it in 1920, actually ended up, I think, sole owner. But he operated it for a lot of years, sometime at least into the 40s, I believe. But my opinion, if you want to talk Geuda Springs, Heyday, it stopped when Tuttle got out of the picture. There was a little kicker when Rainbow Bend discovered a few barrels of oil. They didn't, there was no city there, but there were hundreds of workers. So Geuda Springs got a lot of business for a little while until Rainbow got better established. And actually, they probably continued to get business even into the 30s and 40s. I know I've heard my mother, and because my folks lived in Rainbow for a total of about 7 years, I know they went to Geuda for groceries often. And other stuff. There were some rejuvenation efforts, the last of which, I was there. I didn't know what was happening, but in 1947, a Wichita business and a group of investors were going to dig up the springs and rejuvenate them, and we're going to make Geuda Springs famous again. Well, unfortunately, the head investor, I can't recall his name right off my top of my head, died about a month into the effort, and the whole thing just collapsed, and that was the last of it. To my knowledge, no one has touched those springs since, or attempted to touch them. I think that the consensus would be that those springs went absolutely dry in the late 30s during a flood. They silted in and never flowed since then. I'm also of the opinion that may have been when the dam broke, but Phil Russell, who many of you know, says that he talked to Bruce Stallard, and Bruce Stallard says it was early 40s. Somewhere around 1940, give or take a year, the dam busted for the last time. And folks, that's all I know about Geuda Springs.